It's 6:31, so we might just keep going. Welcome everyone to PVACCS for our first event of the year, how to get a job in critical care. My name is Anthea and I'm one of the event officers alongside with Matt. And we're super excited for the events we have lined up for the rest of the year. Before we launch into the structure of tonight's event, I would just like to begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land, which we meet today, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. Now, for those who have only come across PVACCS recently, PVACCS is a Victorian-based society for medical students and junior doctors from universities or hospitals from across Australia and New Zealand. And we've been operating for now just over a year. And we aim to supplement medical curriculum and development of useful skills and also the career pathways in the fields of anaesthetics, intensive care and pain medicine. So we'll just move on to tonight's structure of the event. So today's event will go for about 60 to 75 minutes.
We don't close the door all the way, the alarm goes off.
Ask people to mute themselves on entry. Thanks, guys. And then we'll start off first with talking about, hearing about what a critical year in general looks like, followed by an intensive care registrar and an anaesthetic consultant to address the components of the selection process, including the CV, cover letters and interviews. And then at the end, we will have about 10 to 15 minutes for question time, and feel free to send through your questions during the event via Slido. And on the next slide, we have the QRS code and the link there for you guys to go on to. Now, next slide, Matt, thanks. So now before we start, I'd just like to introduce our sponsors. And today we're joined by Van Mutual, Emma Saint. And I believe she has some slides and information she'd like to share with us. So take it away, Emma.
Thank you so much for having us here tonight to sponsor your event. What I'm going to do is share my screen. So just bear with me. And then, okay. And you should be seeing the presentation up now. Before I begin the presentation, I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which I am, which is the Turrbal and Yagara people, because I'm based in Brisbane this evening, and also by paying my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. So this slide and this slide deck is really an introduction to Avant and a little bit about us, so that when you're considering medical indemnity insurance throughout your career, you know what it is and you know how we can support you. So a medical defence organisation protects its members' ability to practice medicine, not just for compensation claims, so if you are being sued, but also for things such as disciplinary matters where there may be an APRA or a complaints body inquiry, a coronial inquiry, criminal proceedings or investigations which may occur throughout your career. Our vision at Avant is to be a trusted protector and advisor for our members so that we can support you to practice good medicine and achieve your goals. We are a member-owned organisation, so that means we're owned by the doctors that we're insured with, and we represent more than 79,000 doctors and students throughout Australia. We have the largest and experienced medico-legal defence experts, and we provide support to doctors throughout their career cycle. You might be thinking, why do I, as an intern, a student, a PGY 3 to 5, a doctor in training, why do I need indemnity insurance? Surely my hospital and university gives me some indemnity, and they do. They give you indemnity should you be sued. What they may not give you is support for things such as coronial matters, APRA inquiries, if there was an employment or a training dispute. Last year, we had over 30,000 calls for advice to our medico-legal advisory service, which is more than 80 calls a day where our team supported doctors throughout their career cycle with questions related to more of the ethical questions regarding practice. Common calls that we receive for junior doctors and certainly doctors on critical care pathways in the emergency department, in the anaesthetic unit in the ICU relate to coronial queries, sometimes employment and training disputes, and often we do receive calls which are things such as, should I write this death certificate, knowing that the requirements for death certificates can be different in different states and territories. And sometimes when doctors move locations, they like to call us and double check on whether what they're doing is appropriate and what they should include in that documentation. We have our event law team, which is headed by Justine Byrne, our head, and part of that team is we have a special counsel for Medicare, we have a special counsel for employment, and we also have special counsels for disciplinary matters. While we're a national team, we're based locally. So I have counterparts in Victoria, New South Wales, South Australia, and Australia, so that we can support you regardless of your location. We also have an advocacy team at Avant, and some of the things that we have advocated for over the last year were the no-fault indemnity schemes for COVID-19. We also advocated to rules for COVID-19 vaccines so that practices could advertise factual information about the vaccine. We advocated on the guidelines for bloodborne viruses to help protect the safety of medical practitioners and privacy within those guidelines. We've advocated on voluntary assisted dying to ensure the legal framework protects doctors whether they choose to participate or choose not to participate, and also provides them with resources. So our advocacy team is very present and advocating in that professional space. We have resources for junior doctors available through the Avant Learning Centre, and I will put a link in the chat to this interview that we released with Dr. Annette Hollian, who's an Avant member, and at the time she was the Vice President for the Australian Orthopaedic Association. She's now the President of that association. She's also a RAF Group Captain. She served in East Timor, the Solomon Islands, Indonesia and Afghanistan, but it was her involvement in the 2005 humanitarian mission to recover bodies of her colleagues from a Navy Sea King helicopter crash that really, she says, changed her as a person. So I'll put the link to this podcast in the chat, and please feel free to use this resource. It's open to Avant members and non-Avant members. We are more than just insurance. We do provide doctor in training research scholarships to doctors from intern through their training. We have specialist medico-legal advisors, and we also have a doctor in training medical advisor that's there to provide us with actually an insight into your practice and what you experience, so that we make sure what we offer meets your needs. If you are a student and you're not yet an Avant member, you can join us for free by scanning this QR code. And again, I'll put a link in the chat. If you scan and join today, I'll put my email in the chat, and please email me, because we will arrange for some of our complimentary, environmentally friendly, reusable cutlery to be sent out to you, which is something you will probably need throughout your career, because in my experience, there's never cutlery in hospitals. For those that are an intern or an RMO, you can also join us for free today. And when you do, you get free Doctors Health Fund Light extras. So this provides free private health insurance light extras. Doctors Health Fund is a private health insurer that is part of Avant. It gives you up to $300 off your first dental checkup. You can use it towards mental wellness sessions, up to $50 a session for psychology and counselling. You can use $100 towards prescription lenses and contact lenses. Often we get asked why we would provide these policies free of charge, and we know what a challenge it is as a student and an intern and RMO, one, financially. So we want you to be able to access our support and not have to worry about the cost. I will share a link to these applications in the chat alongside the Annette Hollian interview. I'd like to thank you very much for your time. And if you've got any questions or you'd like to know more about Avant, please feel free to reach out to me directly through my email. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Emma, for that. Thank you for your time as well, and have a good evening. I'd also like to acknowledge our other sponsor for tonight, who's Doctor on Call. Unfortunately, could not be with us today, but will be a year-long sponsor for PVACCS. Now I'd like to hand over to Matt, who will introduce our speakers for the night.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for joining. Very keen to kickstart the year. Much in the same way, the kickstart to your critical care journey will often be the critical care year, which is all important. To talk about that, we have a very special guest today who kindly has volunteered his time, Dr. Patrick O'Sullivan, who's an intensivist from Northern Health, who's the director of their critical care year, with particular interests in end-of-life care in ICU, quality and safety within healthcare, and particularly also the use of echocardiography in intensive care. So I'll let Patrick take it away from here. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Matt, and thanks very much for having me speak tonight. I'll just bring up some slides. You guys will just need to activate the participant screen sharing. I think it's off at the moment.
Does that work now?
Yep, you can try now.
Great, thank you. Great, so I'm just going to give you a little bit of an overview of critical care years in Victoria in general. And obviously it's difficult to go through, they're quite heterogeneous groups, so it's difficult to go through everything in one talk, but we'll just give a brief overview and then focus more on what we look for in applicants when they apply, how to differentiate yourself from the pack, talk about the interview and a little bit of technique around the interview, because I think that's something that's often quite challenging, especially with a quick interview, as they often are. And then also really focus on what to do if you don't get the job that you were originally going for, which is, you know, a situation that we've all been in, and it's important to have a couple of backup plans. So I guess the key thing from a critical care year point of view is that they vary a lot from centre to centre in terms of the level of experience you're expected to have, and the rotations that are actually available during the year. So some might have quite a small amount of crit care and then have more general rotations, like rotations to trauma or neurosurgery, cardiothoracic surgery, or other surgical or medical specialties. But they might have other strengths, like they're great teaching programs. They're based in a big tertiary referral centres with a great case mix. So it's helpful to start thinking about which specialty you really want to pursue and also where you would like to pursue that. I know that's very difficult when you're earlier in your career to kind of make those big decisions, and you don't have to commit to anything firmly, but it's just helpful to have an idea early on roughly where you'd like to end up. I think the critical care years in general, they give you great clinical experience. They're a great platform for making contacts and building relationship with your local ICU or anaesthetic department, so you can start that process of building a relationship that will help you get towards your chosen training program. Unfortunately, and probably judging by the amount of people who have joined tonight, you can tell that they're very competitive. So we generally get about 120 to 150 applicants for the 12 spots per year at the Northern. And we're obviously not one of the bigger centres, so I'm sure some of the centres get far more than that. It is hard to stand out from the crowd and differentiate yourself. So a lot of people, you're all highly motivated, qualified, you know, with lots of achievements, academic and otherwise, on your CVs. So it is hard to stand out. But I think it's important to remember that there's lots of chopping and changing once the offers do start coming through. People get offered jobs in different centres they might prefer. And so you might get an offer in a second or third round, even if you don't get offered one straight away. And there's also lots of really good alternative options that will get you towards your training goal, and that don't involve a crit care year if you're unsuccessful in getting one. So in terms of applicants, so we look at the Northern, we look for PGY3 plus, but a lot of centres will look at PGY2 plus. You really need to have very good to excellent references. And I think the key qualities that we look for, both in terms of the application and also when you're working with us, is that you're self-motivated, you're efficient and proactive, and keen to learn, obviously, and that you're a team player with good communication skills with, you know, patients, families, and your colleagues as well. It's good in the interview to have an idea of where you're headed career-wise, but it's okay to still be deciding. I think just try and have thought as to where you're heading and why you're heading in that direction that you can clearly elucidate in the interview. It just gets you off to a good start in the interview and helps us place kind of which direction you're traveling in. If you have some engagement in research or quality improvements, I think that's helpful, and that's stuff that's relatively easy to access in your junior years. The academic achievements, like there's a lot of masters of critical care, etc. out there. I don't see them as essential for the critical care year. There might be obviously points awarded for them in more formal applications for the ICU college or anaesthetic applications, but I don't think they're essential, and it's not something that would skew us towards picking one candidate over another. And they're also, very expensive. I'm aware that the cost is quite significant. We do like to see practical courses that will actually add to your practice as a junior doctor when you're with us. So if you've kind of taken on ALS2, APLS, done some short ultrasound or echo courses and started that upskilling process, I think they're kind of nice to have and can differentiate you from the crowd. And also then demonstrating engagement in either the organization you're currently working at or in an area of interest like your local RMO society, that can be really helpful as well. It's important to have a really concise and clear cover letter and CV. You have to remember at the Northern, we're looking through over 100 of these applications. So what you might put in place for a application for a training scheme, which is going to be very detailed with a lot of information, you really want to kind of cut that back. Just a clear message on your cover letter, 2-3 paragraphs is plenty. And then for your CV, that it just highlights the key things you want to focus on. 2 pages should be enough. I wouldn't go over that. We're not going to have time to read through everything if it goes beyond that. So really kind of cut it back to what you think are the key things you want to get across when you're applying. And it helps if you're known to us. It's always an advantage. So I don't think, obviously, you don't need to do this for every application. You're going to be applying to lots of centres. Everyone does. But I think if you have maybe 1 or 2 or 3 centres that you're really keen to work in and get the program, I would recommend before recruitment season, before everyone gets overwhelmed, getting through the logistics of recruitment, to organise either, drop an email to the person who's in charge of recruitment or the director and just say you'd like to, is it possible to arrange to catch up and see the units that you're interested in working there, whether that's ICU, anaesthetics, ED, seeing if there's any opportunities, if you're free to get involved in research, especially at your local centre, they'll be more receptive of that. And if you're very, very keen, it's not essential, but you could offer to shadow on a day off and come in and just be exposed to the environment either in theatre or in ICU. So for the interview itself, certainly at the Northern, I presume that most centres have moved to this direction or in the process of moving towards this. It's not just based on gut feel, it's really scored against an objective marking scheme to try and keep it as fair as possible. We screen initially with some screening criteria. Out of the 120 to 150, we interview about 20 to 30 applicants. The interviews are quite quick because there's a lot of people to interview and it's a very time consuming process. So that's another reason why it helps to kind of reach out and make contact before the interview itself, because it's a very, very short time to make an impression. Classically, they're structured as 2 to 3 clinical questions and then a non-clinical question. So people tend to fare fine with the non-clinical questions. They're usually just quite straightforward interview questions, dealing with conflict, how you get your point across clearly, breaking some bad news or some adverse events. The clinical questions people tend to find a bit more tricky. My main piece of advice is don't get bogged down on an in-depth discussion of ABCs and try and ask for feedback or response to what you're doing. It's really about assessing your ability to work through, demonstrate a kind of ABC approach. But the other components of the marking will usually be, about generating a differential of what might be going on, making sure you're escalating the care, calling for help appropriately, thinking about disposition, and then communication with the patient and family. So where people commonly get bogged in is they get into an ABC assessment that then takes up the whole of their speaking time and they only get marked on one component of the question. A calm and structured approach and then appropriate escalation given your skill set and level of training is also key. So that's a very kind of whistle-stop tour of what the career cares generally look like and what we look for when you apply. Often, with the number of applications, you might not get a career care year, and there's other bottlenecks in training. So obviously the most well-known and most significant is the anaesthetics training scheme. It's extremely challenging to get onto that training scheme. And we'll talk about that more later. The the crit care years are getting more and more competitive, and it's also getting more and more competitive to get kind of junior ICU reg positions as well, especially in metropolitan centres. So I think the main thing is, if you don't get these roles that you initially go for, don't panic. It's just kind of, there's more doctors around, there's more people interested in these specialties. And it's not a reflection on you as a person or a doctor or your capabilities. It can be an opportunity to have a more interesting career path and travel a road a bit less traveled. My advice would be to, have a low threshold for thinking outside the box. Think about training remotely or regionally. There's really good centres in far-flung parts of Australia, like the Royal Darwin Hospital or Alice Springs, where you'll get great exposure. You'll get more hands-on time than in many of the bigger centres. You'll see a really interesting case mix. You'll have exposure to, Indigenous health and retrieval medicine. So really good opportunities outside of the big cities that we all kind of commonly think about training in. I would advise you that rather than repeating a resident year or crit care year, or reapplying continuously for the same position, is to think about taking a step up the ladder and going into, even if it's not what you want to do, going into something like medicine or ED regging. That if you come back to apply the following year, rather than having done a kind of a mixed HMO year or another crit care year at another centre, showing that you've stepped up and are starting to develop, showing some career progression, or starting to develop some skills in terms of your leadership abilities, taking on more responsibility, getting more involved in the decision-making process around patient care. They're skills that are more impressive to interviewers, and also will help progress you as a doctor and make you a more attractive applicant and a better interview candidate. And then the final thing I'd say is just think carefully about how much time and effort you want to put into pursuing a given career path. We all have an idea of what we want to do, but sometimes for whatever reason, that original plan is not going to work out. And I have seen people, get bogged down and try to apply for certain training schemes or positions repeatedly, and they get very disheartened. There are lots of interesting career paths within medicine that you can pursue. And so have an open mind about reassessing kind of what pathway you want to go down with your career. I'll take questions at the end, maybe all together. This is just a picture of the foreshore in Darwin, where I ended up getting my first consultant job, which is not anywhere I ever expected to work, but the job in Melbourne didn't work out. And it was a really great year, and I learned lots, and I don't regret working there for 1 second. So, unexpected things can be really rewarding as well. And this is the ICU general training pathway, and I think Dr. Annie Tan, is going to talk us through that from a trainee perspective, which will be more useful than me talking through it. So I'll conclude there. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Really, I'm sure we all found that really valuable. Next up, we've got, as you introduced, we've got Dr. Annie Tan. She's an ICU reg from the Austin Hospital in her 4th year of training. Very excitingly, she's about to be a mum. So congratulations, Annie, and we hope it all goes well. Why don't you take it from here?
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for the introduction. And that was a lovely finish from Patrick, because it's exactly what I'm going to start talking about. So I'm just going to share my slides. All right. So yeah, thanks for the introduction, Matt. So like Matt said, I'm a ICU registrar at the Austin. I've done most of my ICU training there. And today I'm going to be talking about mainly how to get onto the college. The ICU training scheme is a bit different to the anaesthetic scheme in that we still have to apply for a job every year and find and navigate our job applications through that, but also to ensure that we actually fulfill all the criteria to complete training. So it's a bit different. Bit of a disclaimer. So most of my talk is just gathered from personal experience, and things have definitely changed from when I applied for the college. And a lot of the information that I've taken for this talk is actually from the KICM website. Requirements for training will change with time. So this is probably more relevant for those of you who are in your HMO years compared to junior medical students. And make sure that you're up to date. So just if you're really interested in ICU training, make sure that you frequently check out the KICM website, because eligibility requirements change frequently. So just like Patrick showed in that last slide, this is the training program. for ICU, and it's a very I find it to be a very busy slide. Even though they've color coded things, it's very busy. There's a lot of words, but I'll break it down. So essentially, ICU training, it's about 6 to 7 years of training in total. 42 months of core ICU training, and 6 months of that is required to be completed prior to you applying for the program. And whilst you do core ICU training, you'll get a mixture of, you have to make sure that you do train in a centre that does cardiothoracics, neuro ICU, as well as trauma as part of your training. Anaesthetic time, of an elective training. So apart from the 6 or 7 years, we also have 2 exams. There's a first part exam, which is also known as the primary examination, and we finish off with the fellowship exam at the end. Other mandatory parts of training include a formal research project that needs to be done, and that's usually done for following your first part examination, and a whole selection of other mandatory courses such as communication courses, echocardiography. There's a whole list, as well as some online courses, and a handful of what we call WCAs, which essentially is work-based assessments and observed clinical encounters, almost like OSCEs that we do at med school, that need to be signed off during our training to ensure that we complete it satisfactorily. To be eligible, it's pretty straightforward. Anyone with a medical degree, anyone who's completed internship, anyone who's registered with AHPRA, and anyone who's completed 6 months of supervised ICU time within the last 3 years. And a lot of that would be as a crit care HMO, or it could be a medical or surgical year in which you do 6 months of ICU as part of your rotations. You also need to be able to provide 3 referees, and 2 of those referees need to be fellows from the Kickham College. So it's usually any ICU consultant, and 1 of those referees need to be a senior ICU nurse. And the referees get sent a essentially almost like a performer that asks a set of questions about how well they think you will be how well they think you will do as an ICU trainee, and they rank you from essentially 1 to 5, and you get a average score at the end, which forms a part of your total score, which I'll talk about. Otherwise, the application process is actually it's a little bit different compared to when I did it a few years back. It used to be 2 intakes per year, and now it's only 1 intake, and usually it opens around May, and the dates are updated every year on the Kickham website. So again, make sure you get on top of it if you're a HMO2 or HMO3, and check around early March and April, because they've released the dates about that time. There's a lot of paperwork, and you need to apply for an application pack from Kickham, which the pack includes essentially everything you need to know, checklists and tick boxes to ensure that you've got everything ready to submit your application. And you have about 3 months to complete it from when you receive the pack. And usually I think July is the cutoff date as to when you can ask for the pack, and August is when you have to submit everything. And also need to make sure that you are aware that you need to provide evidence for all the things that you submit. So that's qualifications, your letters of service, your courses, your research, your volunteering. All those things need to be photocopied and certified by a Justice of Peace before you mail it back to them. So it's very time consuming. So I guess my message is don't leave it last minute, because you won't get it done in time. And this includes postage time as well, because we have to send the pack back to the college via mail instead of online submission. So my talk will be mainly about the CV, the structured CV side of things, because at the moment there is still no interview component to apply for the college, which I think the college has been talking about it for a few years now, introducing an interview component, but it just hasn't happened as yet. So instead, most of my talk will be focusing on what they're looking for in the CV, and most of the points that I'm going to put up in are essentially taken directly from the Kickham website. So the CV that you submit has to be structured in the Kickham format. dot, and these are the 8 dot points that they look at, and the points associated with it are the maximal amount of points you can score in each of the sections, and we'll go through that one by one. So starting with qualifications, so it looks very messy. So essentially, if you've got a fellowship in any other college, you score maximum 7 points straight up. So this is for someone who's previously an anaesthetist, or someone who's done their physician's training, someone who's done ED training already, and they've gotten their letters. You score the maximum 7 points for qualifications straight up. Otherwise, other things that are probably more relevant for us, it's any other university degree in addition to your medical degree, completion of a master's degree, or maybe if you've done a primary exam of the other colleges listed. So usually either ED anesthetics, which and then sometimes you may have thought of a career change halfway through. That also gives you some points. Clinical experience. So this is about the amount of time that you've worked. So usually people start applying as a PGY3 or PGY4. And you have to submit all your time of where you've worked and what rotations you did and your role in them. So whether you were a resident or you stepped up as a registrar during those roles, and the amount of time, the longer you've done, the more time, the more points you get, essentially. Academic achievements. So this one is, again, so it's just like any other CV that you would submit, especially like the ones that you do for internship submission. Any kind of academic excellence awards that you've earned during your medical schooling, especially Dean's List, Dean's Prize, first class honours during your final year, they are all awarded 1 point each. And the only way to really score the maximum 7 points is if you top the medical school of your year. So I can't think of too many people that would get 4 points in this area. And research, which is often a big component. So if you've got a PhD, you again just score the maximum 7 points straight away. Other things they look for is if you've got an MD, and apart from the basic publication of a paper, other things that you could be involved in would be getting involved in writing a textbook chapter, doing a part-time research position, whether that was lab-based prior to you getting onto medicine, all these things, as well as developing an education resource, so developing apps, websites and things like that. These all score you points. And like I said, this is taken directly from the college under their structured CV tab on the website, and it's essentially any part of research or textbook, or writing up a textbook, or doing any sort of developing of an education resource like an app or policy. These will all score you points, and again, only a maximum of 7 points can be earned in this area. So it doesn't mean that the more you do, the better. It's you can only max that at 7 points. Courses. So I think this is a great way, just like what Patrick was saying before, a great way to start getting into critical care. And there are a lot of courses that are highly recommended that people who are interested in critical care would do. And this includes advanced airway skills courses, which from memory, the one I did was at Western. It was the ACE course at Western Health. That was very, very popular. There's also an Alfred airway skills course, and there's plenty of, there's lots and lots. And all these courses can be found listed in the GIG website, so the ones that they recommend. And they often have links that you directly to the course for booking. The issue with the courses in the last couple of years is obviously with COVID and lockdown, a lot of courses have stopped running, or they've been running in an online format, and obviously a lot of these courses are actually hands-on courses, so they've been quite difficult to get in the last 2 years. But other courses I would suggest will be any sort of advanced life support course, and any sort of kind of the donor awareness course is a very good one to do. It's run by Donate Life, and that introduction to organ donation is the course that anyone can do. It's open to anyone that's interested in organ donation and critical care, and it's still free at the moment, and there's lots of dates to pick from. It's run throughout all the states. And the other one, obviously, that's related to intensive care, specifically is the basic course, which again is run throughout multiple times during the year. Other courses like echocardiography might be a bit too early to do it as a HMO2. I definitely do know people who have done it, but it's more useful as a course once you're at registrar level, just because you get to practice doing your skills. And other communication courses, they're kind of courses that are directly offered by the college once you're a trainee, so they're less relevant. But I would say airway skills course, advanced life support, donor awareness, and the basic course are definitely things that you could do to score points on your CV and just to get a taste of what quick care is like. So the college definitely does value rural experience. So anyone that's got experience in a rural setting for both not medicine but also high school scores you points in the rural origin experience heading in the CV. So if you were in a rural clinical school, that would give you 2 points. Or if you've done a bit of time in a rural hospital as a junior doctor, that would also score you a couple of points. Anyone with an Indigenous background or who is involved with the Indigenous community, again, that also scores you 7 points directly. And like I said, anything that you put down the CV, there needs to be evidence backed up with it. So you can't just say, yes, I'm of Indigenous background. There needs to be like a supporting letter from your community to say that you are part of the Indigenous community and things like that. And that goes with any of the other things that I've mentioned in the last headings. Anything you submit needs to come with evidence to support it. And the final topic, relevant personal experiences. So this I found interesting because I don't remember this being part of the CV when I applied, but parental leave and military service scores you points, and any involvement in sort of community projects, volunteering, and humanitarian activities, they all score you points. And it's not something that, it's not like a volunteering thing that you just do once off and that's it. What they're looking for is long-term involvement in a community service, so that whether that's for more than a year or more than 2 years, the longer you're involved, the better. And again, evidence needs to be provided from that community program or project that you're part of to say that you've volunteered for a long time with them. Anything that you've just done as a once-off doesn't really count, fortunately. So recently, in the last 2 years, the college has also introduced the situational judgment test as part of the selection criteria. I think it was introduced last year as a trial run, but it's back this year in 2022, but I don't know how they're going to incorporate the results into the actual selection process. But what they did last year was there was around 40 questions. It was done in an online format, and it was mainly just based on behavioural questions. So clinical scenarios, where there was things related to ethical issues, conflict and things like that. And you had to rank your response from 1 to 5. There'll be 5 responses, and that would represent the most appropriate to the least appropriate response. You can only submit the test once, but you can go back and change the responses as much as you like prior to submitting it. And in 2021, it was just a trial run, so it was not included in the final selection criteria. Like I said before, there are no interviews for the selection process into the college, and I haven't heard about when they're going to introduce it. I don't think there is a plan to in the next few years at least, but don't take my word for it. And the final selection process, so once you've had all your paperwork done and ready and you've mailed it back, the pack will then be sorted and it's all the information is forwarded to the trainee selection panel of the college. In 2021, the total scores you can see here, it's basically the structured CV score and then the mean structured referee score. So there's 17 items that they need to score you out of 5, and so they take the average of it. And it's both are equally weighted, and usually you will hear an outcome within 30 days. Like I said, in 2022, it's unclear how the SJTs will fit into the scoring system. It's not mentioned in the website how they will do it. And just with anything, there is an application fee, and I think the trainee registration fee is $2,400 for the college. Resources. So I would say definitely speak to ICU HMOs, cricket care HMOs, registrars about how they ended up doing ICU. You will find that people have literally ended up in ICU from all walks of life. So they may have been a physician in the past, an ED physician in the past, an anaesthetist in the past, and then ended up doing intensive care. Or now maybe more of the junior staff have come straight from a crit care HMO year and have wanted to do ICU all along. Or some people, which is the category I fall into, they may have previously been a medical or surgical or general year HMO, didn't really know what they wanted to do, and then just found ICU to be a wonderful career option and got into ICU like that. So talk to people around you, talk to, just echoing what Patrick said, show your face to the unit in the hospital that you're working in. Just show that you're interested in ICU, and you'll get a host of responses from a variety of people, and you'll find very quickly that people have ended up in ICU via different paths. Pretty much all of my talk has been taken from the college website. We've got a pretty good, awesome team. They reply emails very, very quickly, and the website's quite easy to navigate. So if you've got any information about applying to be a trainee, or anything about the training program, shoot them an email and they'll reply very, very quickly. And also in each ICU, there will be an SOT. So that's the supervisor of training, and there's usually a couple in each unit, and they also know quite extensively about the application process. So speak to them about it, and they'll also be able to give you lots of tips. And some final tips from myself. So like I said, if you're interested in ICU, start talking to the trainees and consultants in your hospital. I found that when I was a junior doctor, I didn't really know what ICU was. As a med student, I didn't get much ICU time at all. I probably only had one day in ICU, just as a quick, this is ICU and this is what it looks like, but I didn't really quite understand what we did as an intern. But then, once you show your face and you show that you're interested, get involved. So whether that would be from a research or doing an audit perspective, or just apply for an ICU rotation to try things out, whether you're doing a medical, a crit care, a surgical or general year. And if you're a medical student, I highly suggest that you do an elective in your final year as in an ICU, to see if that's something that you think would be something that you like doing in your future career. And once you show your face and you get to know people, find yourself a mentor, and a mentor will be able to guide you through your career. And I can guarantee you the mentors that you find now will often end up being lifelong mentors and friends throughout the rest of your career. And they'll be able to give you excellent advice. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Annie. That was a phenomenal presentation. I'm sure we would agree. Some really useful tips there. I appreciate how you broke everything down quite thoroughly. Lucky last in today's panel, we've got Sue Yen, who is an anaesthetist from Northern Health. I hope everyone can see my slides. So Sue Yen's a pretty interesting guy. He's a third-year consultant, so quite fresh out of the program with a special interest in obstetrics and peds. Interestingly, he actually did an internship in a Michelin star restaurant. And I'm sure he can tell you about how avid of a cook he is. So take it away, Sue Yen.
Thanks. I'm just going to share my slides. Thanks, Patrick and Annie, for the presentation. I was just actually reflecting how if I apply now, I don't think I'll get in. And the information that I think both Patrick and Annie have given is kind of stuff that I wish I knew when I was a junior doctor, and indeed as a crit care resident applying for anaesthetics. I'm Sue Yen. I'm an anaesthetist at the Northern Hospital. Asari, I think she should be in the meeting as well. She's one of the supervisors for the crit care residents that come through to the anaesthetic department at the Northern. And this year, I will also be helping out with as a supervisor role. I think a lot of what I'm going to talk about, Patrick has already covered, so I will skip through some of what I've prepared. So let's have a look. So in terms of anesthesia training, in a very sort of short form, there's a program in basically every state. Every state's application process is different. So I guess I don't really have an in-depth breakdown on the application process in every state. You'll have to look at the ANZCA website, and they have basically a section for each state and how to apply. In terms of the Victorian training program, there are currently 4 training schemes, and you apply essentially to a central system, and each scheme will shortlist you and rank you, and then ask applicants to come for an interview. Notably, there's also a GP anesthesia program, which is a 1-year program for GPs to train to give anesthetics in the rural setting. Just in case if you were thinking about doing anesthesia via a different route, that is also an option. There are approximately about 40 to 50 positions per year. If you do apply interstate, there is a possibility of transferring back, although I don't know exactly what that process is, but certainly I've got colleagues who have done that. The training program is 4 years and plus 1 year of provisional fellowship, which is basically you have to complete it before you get your full qualifications. So it's essentially a 5-year training program. And there are 2 exams to pass and some mandatory requirements such as courses and research. Training program, there are also some further options to take within the college, one of which is PAIN, and that's 2 years with an exam. And I believe the college is starting a perioperative medicine fellowship, which is not an official, they haven't started that. So that's the training program in a nutshell. I'm not in any sort of selection process, so I take a very neutral sort of stance on the information I've given. So to get into anesthesia, essentially you have to apply, much like in terms of intensive care, as either a 3rd year or more senior. And from what I've gathered is that the critical care year, when you rotate to the anesthesia training, the weeks, they're kind of basically your informal interview process in the way that the selection panel for each training scheme, well, although I can't comment on the other training schemes, but at least for the Northwestern one, which includes Austin, Northern, Western, Werribee, and Peter Mac, essentially they are representatives from each hospital who make up a interview panel. And if they know you and you've been through their hospital, it's a plus. But your critical care position, your critical care time in anesthetics allows you to, I guess, know the supervisor of training, and also to, probably most importantly, to develop referees that can give you a good reference for the application. So I guess what I didn't realize when I was applying, and this is why I think I'll never get on at this stage, is that when you ask for a reference, you want to ask someone who has a good relationship, like a good working relationship with you. And this isn't sort of much about asking someone to just tick off, 5 out of 5 or 10 out of 10, whatever the marking criteria might be, which I guess I believe most people would do. But the most important thing is there's always a little box at the end of each section that allows the referee to write something. And this is probably the most important thing that I think people miss out on, is a reference where someone has written something very specific about what you did that was good. And it doesn't have to be you intubated someone with perfect technique. It may be a reflection on a mistake that you made or some sort of conflict that you have. I think that makes your reference much stronger than just any old reference with a perfect score. So I think that's something that I never really realized, and I think after seeing some I guess trainees come through and ask for references, it is something that to keep in mind. There's obviously the CV and the interview. I want to talk a little bit about the crit care position, but I guess more from an anaesthetic, angle. So in terms of your CV, I think Patrick has covered that very thoroughly. What the anaesthetic, I guess from an anaesthetic slant point of view, is that you want to make your intentions very clear in both your cover letter and your CV, and don't repeat what you've put in your CV and in your cover letter. The courses are useful. You don't need a big list, but I think more importantly, what you've done with the courses is seen. I guess what I mean is that, for example, if you've done ALS and BLS, that's great, but a lot of people can do that. But if you become an instructor, or if you've done an echo course and you manage to then teach that to maybe medical students, that you've done something with the course, I think that adds, it differentiates you from everyone else who can sign up for a course, pay for the money, and take the time. Every aspect of your CV should help your position, even outside medicine. So let's just say, for example, you are a football coach or a pilot outside of work, whatever you want to do. You should be able to link that to why you're link that to help your application. So, for example, if you're a football coach, it means you could just thinking on top of my mind, you can motivate kids, you can deal with conflict, you work as a team. Those are aspects that you should be able to highlight, and those things make you stand out, because everyone has gone through medical school, got good marks, done internship. So these are the things that sort of make you stand out. Ideally, I think 2 pages. I think Patrick is right, but definitely less than 3, or less than or equal to 3. In terms of the interview, so this is again my sort of fairly neutral stance, because I haven't interviewed for or haven't been on a selection panel. Practice. I can't emphasize that enough. You should know your CV very well, because you may be asked certain questions or about certain things that you've done on your CV. Present well. Try and not be in scrubs. Ask for time off work so you can take some time to feel relaxed. It means that you're taking this sort of seriously. I believe on the panel for the Northern, and Patrick could correct me, there's ICU, ED, anaesthetic, and also HR representative. And the questions can be ethical, behavioural, can be related to sort of quality assurance, and clinical questions. And much like what Patrick has emphasised, we don't really expect much depth in clinical questions, but what we want to know is that you are a safe doctor with a very systematic approach. So don't speak for minutes and minutes about how you would look at the airway, for example. Be very concise. Speak, I think, maximum of 2 minutes per answer. At the end, you may be asked to see if you have a question you want to ask. I think be very specific about that question, otherwise don't ask. So, for example, a question that would be useful would be, I'm just sort of thinking that, as a critical care resident in anaesthetics, will I often be paired up with a consultant and a registrar, or just a consultant? Or during after hours, what kind of supervision would I expect? Or something very specific. And if you otherwise don't ask a question. So from an anaesthetic department point of view, what we expect from a crit care resident is that you pretty much always ask for help. The airway seems to be always the fun bit, and that is true, but I think that's the easy part. So often operating theatres will print out a list of patients that will come to theatre the day before, try and review the patients on paper at the very least, either the day before or in the morning before work, try and see the patients. But most importantly, talk to the consultant that you're paired up with and discuss what you're trying to get out for that day. Because I think it can be very overwhelming as a junior doctor in anaesthetics, because a lot happens very quickly, and there are a lot of people in theatre, and their scrub nurses telling you off. You don't know where to stand, you don't know what to touch, you don't know what this button does, and it all just sort of happens, and the patient's on the bed and they're asleep, and then all of a sudden you're trying to bag and mask a patient. So I try not to get sort of overwhelmed, and maybe just discuss with the consultant about maybe one thing or two things that you want to do well on that day. And most importantly, ask for feedback at the end of the day. And this is partly to help you learn on the day, but also to develop that professional relationship with the consultant, so that when you do ask for a reference, they can write something down very specific about what you've done on that day, as a learning experience. The rest of the stuff is sort of self-explanatory, sort of documentation, attend department meetings, and obviously, as Patrick said, many hospitals have non-anaesthetic ICU or ED rotations, such as ward cover, which is part of the job. And I guess what should you expect from the anaesthetic rotation? Some coffee is always good. But I personally think that the rotation is quite an unusual rotation, because you don't have a pager. You usually don't have a pager, unless maybe if you're doing the pain round. But there's hardly any paperwork in terms of faxing or referrals. You actually have a very, very little responsibility as a resident. You're always paired up with a consultant or a senior registrar. And it's just a full-time learning experience, both, I guess, hands-on, and also there's quite a lot of downtime where you can talk about, for example, cases, life, applications, whatever you want to do. So make the most of it, because I remember working as a resident in other rotations, and you're half the time you're just chasing paperwork, and can be quite frustrating. I get a feel for what it feels like to work as an anaesthetist. So the majority of our work is in operating theatres, as you guys would probably know. There is some off-the-floor work, such as doing anaesthesia in imaging, such as MRI or CT. There's some pre-admission clinics, and there's also pain round. I guess that's probably all I'll say about what you should expect from the anaesthesia rotation. I'll move on to, just don't want to sort of double up too much with sort of Patrick. Yeah, I also want to say what you shouldn't do. So I've been a consultant for 3 years, and I think I haven't had as much experience we're not expecting you to know how to give anesthesia or how to manage the airway. But what we do expect you to do is know when you ask for help. And if you don't, the nurse will, I think this is all critical care jobs, is that to have that sort of situation awareness about knowing when your limits are is very key, because ultimately, in the end, as an anaesthetic trainee, the consultant needs to trust you to be able to walk outside the room. If you're not going to ask for help and just carry on with what you're trying to do, and that can be quite dangerous, and that's a really bad, I guess, attribute. Don't turn up just for the fun bit, and just treat the entire theatre team respectfully, because there are surgeons, scrub teams, there are technicians there, and they're all professionals working. There can be 10 people in theatre, and treat everyone with respect. Some resources. Google is very useful, and it still is very useful. Talk to your registrar, talk to your consultant. The college website has all the details about how to apply for the training program. I was just having a look. There is an information session in May, and you can just sign up to that to listen to the Victorian information center, the information center for the Victorian training program. It might be a good time to just listen in so that you can prepare for the application, which opens in May. In terms of interview, I would so practice. I found a book fairly useful, The Medical Interviews, by this company called ICS Medical. One of the UK trainees pointed that out to me. And that's about it. I think anaesthesia is, it's obviously a nice career. I sort of went through, took some time off. I took, when Patrick said going through, I guess, the slightly off beaten path. I've worked in a few different countries. You'd think always have line up for you. It can be quite hard to I guess not get on the program and see your colleagues get on with training. But I don't think that is an opportunity lost. I think there's many opportunities outside that's waiting to be discovered, and it often makes you a much more well-rounded doctor. And I think you'll come back a lot stronger that way. So thanks.
Thank you, Suyen. That was a great talk. And again, I think we all really appreciate your insight, your wisdom. To all the speakers tonight, we all, on behalf of PVACCS, are really appreciative of the time you've put in to help us out. One final request is that you bear with us for a few questions, if that's okay. I'll share a screen and I'll let Anthea take over. Thank you.
Alrighty, so we've got a few questions coming through and are open to the floor for everyone, Patrick, Annie, Suyen, to just answer as appropriate. So our first question is research in non-crit care areas, for example, surgery, viewed favourably in a crit care year and ICU ANOS training applications?
From a crit care year kind of point of view, definitely, yeah. The main thing with the early research early in your career, I think, is that you're demonstrating an interest in the area, and that you're committing to following through on a process and engaging with learning more about research. So yeah, certainly from a crit care point of view or an ICU application point of view, that's absolutely valid and taken seriously. And then Suyen can probably talk to whether it's helpful from an anaesthetic training application point of view.
Yeah, I think it's certainly useful. The other thing I want to highlight about research is that rather than being one author in a paper that's been published out of 10 other authors, doing an audit or a small project within a hospital that you've done and initiated, and say as an audit you've completed the cycle and you followed up the results, you made some sort of change and re-audited. I think that shows I guess just as much weight, in my opinion anyway. And again, I'm fairly neutral because I'm not on a selection program, I'm on the process.
Thank you very much. It just cut out, sorry, apologies. And next question is it true that there is a big backlog of fully trained anaesthetists having difficulty finding any work in Metro Melbourne? Might be for you, Suyen.
Yeah, good question. I definitely know of people who have finished training who are still looking for work. But when I say that, though, there is work. I think COVID has made hiring slower. So I definitely wouldn't make that an issue in terms of whether you wanted to do anesthetics or not. Yeah, there are definitely jobs, and most of my colleagues that have tried to apply for work have found work within 12 months.
Fantastic. So if you want to do anesthetics, just go for it. All right. I think another one. Are there some states or regions where it's easy to get onto the anesthetics program?
That I don't know. Yeah, that I really don't know. I know a colleague who's gone to New Zealand to do the training program and have come back halfway through. But yeah, I actually don't know. I mean, based on the numbers itself, I believe New South Wales and Victoria are harder just for every specialty, really, just from a population point of view. I guess that's why we do encourage applying interstate if possible.
Great. Next question. Is there any time limit on CV items for system application? For example, research within a certain number of years? Annie?
Yeah, there is. So for the research part, I think the paper needs to have been published within 5 years of application. There's a very, very detailed list about all the criteria that they look into on the structured CV component on the website, which you can find on the KICM application website.
Fantastic. And similarly, I guess on the line of research, how important is research publication for crit care HMO? For example, what percentage of crit care HMO jobs are offered to people with zero research experience?
They're not vital. You can't get a crit care position without having done research. It would be unusual to apply without having something. It doesn't, as CM was saying, it doesn't need to be a big research paper. It can be just, either research, or I would rank, quality activities on a similar par. So if you've done an audit or engaged in a small research project as part of your medical degree, for example, just show that you've gone through the process, that would be fine. I guess you just be at a slight disadvantage given almost everyone has something, whether it's an audit or a small research project. But if you do a really good interview and the rest of your CV is really good, it wouldn't be a deal breaker for you getting a crit care year position. And
I guess moving on, talking about audits, what are audits and how can I become involved with them from a medical student point of view?
So just looking at an aspect of care. So for example, you might do a trauma audit to see whether your emergency department was utilizing the correct trauma resus form. So that's one that's happening in our emergency department at the moment, whenever they have a trauma, and look at the compliance with use of the form since it's been brought in. And then you would report the details that can be used as a way of measuring your quality of care that you're delivering in a given department. And we have about 40 things we could be auditing in ICU that we are not necessarily always auditing. And so just come and talk to one of the consultants in ICU and talk to the head of research. I'm sure it's the same in anaesthetics, the Northern, and in ICU at the Austin as well. And there's lots of opportunities to participate. So just come and talk to any of the consultants and they'll point you in the right direction.
Fantastic. Any advice on how to best approach asking a consultant as a med student for good reference?
I put my little sort of 2 cents to this. Last year, I took some second year medical students for their essentially it's a tutorial, bedside tutorial. I find that having a relatively not just like 1 day sort of exposure, but over a few months, and I had them for a whole year, and I felt very comfortable giving them a good reference. Obviously, if they're good. So I think let's just say you wanted to apply for crit care job, you may not necessarily need a crit care related consultant to give you that reference, but I'd find someone that you have a good working relationship with and ask them.
Great advice. And I think our final question that's come through is, how can we as medical students get involved in research projects?
Yeah, just like as what Patrick said, talk to registrars, talk to consultants, talk to nurses that are involved in research projects in the unit, just get involved, just ask. If you don't ask, you won't know.
And what makes you give someone an excellent reference? Might be one for you, Suyen.
I think, and please chime in if Patrick Lenny has any sort of advice here, but I personally feel that ultimately you want to be someone that we want to work with. And so it doesn't matter what PhD or research you've published, means being a good person and being a good doctor. I guess I have to just reiterate that, but by showing up to work, being diligent, being keen, asking the right questions at the right time, having situational sort of awareness in theatre, and for example, maybe not ask something unrelated while the patient's deteriorating. They're sort of useful things. But like after a few, I guess, sessions of working with a student or a resident, you start to develop some sort of sense of who they are and what they're like. I think it's that sort of relationship that makes at least me write a good reference. And specifically, as I mentioned, that little box at the end of each section is what you really want the referees to write something in, because ticking boxes is easy. And sometimes you may need to be that explicit and say, hey, is it okay if you use that as a resident or a registrar, until one of the residents asked me to do it. And I thought, oh, that's probably what I should do.
I think as well, just taking an interest in the department, you might notice something in the department that isn't running optimally, and you kind of, instead of just kind of giving out about it, you actually say, oh, I'd like to upgrade the orientation book, or I think we could do this better. Just taking that general interest in making the environment better for all the staff is something that makes you stand out from the crowd as well.
Annie, anything else you would like to add to that one?
I think, yeah, what Suya mentioned about don't find, the most well-known person to ask for a reference. Look for someone that knows you well and who can actually give you a good reference. So that's someone that you've worked with for a long time, someone that, if they do get a phone call from, because consultants do call each other, and they will ask about you over the phone. And if they say, oh, I don't really know who this person is, that's already a failed reference. So it's not about how prestigious someone is, it's just about how well you've worked with someone and how long you've worked with them and how well they can vouch for you.
Thank you, everyone. I think that wraps up our night. I just want to thank everyone for coming along, and particularly to our speakers for their time and giving us so many tips. I think we can all take away something from today's talks, whether we want to do ICU and aesthetics or both. So thank you, Patrick, Annie, and Suyen. I'd also like to thank our sponsors as well for the night. PVACCS are extremely excited. We've got a few events coming up. One of them is our ICU mini series. So they'll be focusing on a few high yield topics like shock and respiratory failure. So please stay tuned. That will all be on our social media. And for those who had to leave early or want to watch again, this will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. So keep tuned. So thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your evening. See you guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.